A couple of years ago, when you first became commissioners, I gave you a much longer briefing on the Greater Lebanon Refuse Authority. It included some of the waste management planning as well. This will be somewhat shorter because the topic really is just the solid waste management planning. In brief, the origin of the GLRA started back in the late 50s. It became an organization that involved all of the municipalities in the county. And so in the 80s, when the EPA regulations and the DEP regulations changed, we were already poised to do waste management. Act 97 and Act 101 are the two acts which actually defined what had to be done. Janet Fleming was the first engineer that did the waste management plan that was signed in 1990. Some of their recommendations were utilized, but what the GLRA and the commissioners at the time decided was that the logical thing to do was to delegate waste management planning to the GLRA. Mike Pavlik was hired as the executive director. He hired a recycling coordinator, then he hired an engineer. So there was a staff available. The initial plan covered the basics in 1990. When we looked
Excuse me, were you the engineer?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I was the engineer. You know, it's been, for those of you who are doing the math, it was 25 years. I've been the executive director for 5 years.
Excellent.
I still tell people that when I drove around with Mike that first day, I couldn't believe I was applying for a job at a dump. But what a blast it's been. It really has. It's been a lot of fun.
It certainly brought it a long way, so.
It's come a long ways, yes.
But anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I thought you were the engineer now.
That's okay. There are two key documents that come from you to the GLRA that form the legal basis for the way we work. I've tabbed both of them. There's a municipal solid waste management agreement, and then there's ordinance 42. These actually get refreshed every 10 years as well. So as we get further into the process, we'll talk about the legalities of how to make those two things happen. The key component that you need from me, and the state wants from me, is do I have capacity? There's a capacity assurance requirement that the county has to have. And as of right now, I have about 5 years, 6 years of capacity left, and we're in the planning stage for about another 20 to 25 years worth of capacity. So by the time we get around to redoing these agreements, we should be able to set things out in front of you and say, yes, we have the capacity assurance that you're required to provide as part of waste management planning. We take a different approach to waste management planning than Janet Fleming did. We look at waste management planning in great detail. We ask and try and answer such questions as, okay, well, what about incineration? You know, what about material recycling facilities? What does it make sense to do within the county? And we built several models as part of that for the 2000 plan that we refreshed for the 2010 plan. The consultant that was able to do that is somewhere on the West Coast now. So we're working with SCS engineers to take a look at those models and try and reproduce them. And that's where the planning grant comes in. That's what gives us the funding to actually pay for that consultant. We work directly with DEP. We submit all the disbursement requests to DEP. You get the check, and you're gracious enough to sign the check over to us to recover costs.
We do a lot of that, Larry.
Yeah, we
Not
wish we
just
could
with
keep
you.
it.
Right now, we're still looking at the 2020 timeframe to have a completed waste management plan revised. We're a little early this time. Last time we didn't start until 2009. We're already looking at organizing the Solid Waste Advisory Committee. And there are specific requirements about who needs to be on that. There has to be representatives from different size municipalities. There have to be specific representatives from industry and from education. We always invite the haulers. Sometimes they actually come and participate, and we get their viewpoint as well. You know, the basics of the plan are we look at not just the practices, but we look at planning for the future. We look at education within the county, and we look at enforcement. Those are all things that are delegated under those two agreements, the agreement and the ordinance. From us, you should expect to be kept in the loop. I've given you a couple of excerpts that are the forward and the executive summary from the previous waste management plan, just so that you can orient yourself a little bit to what goes on. But we've always done a very good job of making sure that communication flows between us so that you get some reading to do, and any questions that you have, you're more than welcome to ask, or ask us to come join you. So I would anticipate that somewhere in 2019, we'll have a finished waste management plan ready to go. That is assuming you still wish us to continue that process. Once we get the Solid Waste Advisory Committee going, that would be a time to actually start into that. Because one of the first things I'll do is, you know, the people on that committee are new. So we try and update them with all the existing stuff. So they see, well, where are we? And we also, at that time, tell people, okay, we don't need to update everything, but we start with certain basic things and say, well, we need to update this. One of the things I did not update the last plan and would not update going forward is the concept of, should the Greater Lebanon Refuse Authority build a material recycling facility? You know, realistically, the only way that works is if we capture all of the recycling within the county. But there's already private industry involved in that. You know, it's not our mission to compete with private industry. So we try and work with them and make sure we understand where they are. But in terms of actually updating that portion of the plan, I don't anticipate putting a lot of effort into that. It'll be mentioned, but that's typical of what we're talking about.
Okay. Any questions, John?
I guess I'd just ask you about your electronic recycling program and how that's worked for you.
This year, for the first year, the stream of electronics recycling is reducing. But you have to recognize that electronics recycling, there are two sides to that. There's what falls under the Covered Device Recycling Act that the state legislature has enacted. And there's what we've tried to do outside of that. And for a while, we were able to recycle a great deal of stuff that was outside of the required Covered Device Recycling Act. Markets changed. It became obvious that we were going to be paying to transport a microwave, for instance, to the Pittsburgh area, and they were going to throw most of it in the landfill. And it just didn't make sense to take a microwave from Lebanon County to go into a landfill in the Pittsburgh area. So there were a certain amount of things that we pulled out of the electronic waste recycling, and we just said, well, with the economics today, it has to go to the landfill. The current legislature position is that both the industry and the legislature recognizes that the Covered Device Recycling Act is deeply flawed, both from the manufacturer's perspective and from our perspective in working with it. And there is activity going on, as I understand it, to repeal it and replace it with something that actually works for both the computer electronics industry and the waste people.
What you actually need today is, the DEP has awarded a $75,000 grant toward the cost of rewriting the plan, which the total cost is $93,750, I think.
Yes.
Okay. So that's being awarded to the county. You need to take action to accept that and sign the agreement. We'll get it back to DEP, and that'll get the ball rolling on the funds.
I'll make a motion to accept the $75,000 DEP grant to work with our waste management plan.
It's been moved and seconded. Any questions, comments? If not, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. So moved.